What is training to failure and should you train to failure? This is a highly debated topic in bodybuilding, and I think it deserves some clarification because a lot of people talk about training to failure, always train to failure, train to absolute failure. I train till I can get every possible rep, but failure is actually defined a little bit differently than most people think. So this is coming from a meta-analysis from 2022 called Intensity of Effort and Momentary Failure in Resistance Training. Are we asking a binary question for a continuous variable by James Fisher, James Steele, and Dave Smith. And the key quote I want to pull out of this is for this piece, momentary failure is defined as the point trainees reach where, quote, despite attempting to do so, they cannot complete the concentric portion of their current repetition without deviation from the prescribed form of exercise. Furthermore, we have termed this momentary failure rather than muscular failure herein because there is no current consensus on where the lack of continued ability to carry on with the task despite attempts to do so arises, e.g., centrally at the neural level or peripherally at a motor neuron end plate or muscular level. So uh, I'll explain that last bit in a minute. But the important piece here is where you cannot complete the concentric portion of the current repetition. So what does that mean? Let's say you're doing a leg press and you can do 10 full reps without assistance, without pausing, whatever, within the current form guidelines you have of depth, how you're controlling the eccentric, how much you're moving and using other parts of your body, like your hips or your back. Um, and you can do 10 full clean reps. If you do those 10 reps and then stop, that is not technically momentary failure. That is not failure. That is training to 0 reps in reserve or 1 rep from failure because you're not actually failing. If you go and then attempt the 11th rep and get stuck, that's failure. That's training to failure. So all these people who say I'm a high intensity trainer, I complete every possible rep, I take every set to the infinite, I take every set to failure. Usually they don't. Usually they take every set to 0 reps in reserve or 1 rep away from failure, 1 rep short of failure. So that's a really important distinction. And I think a lot of people um, are discounting that and saying, I trained to failure on this set, I trained to failure on every set, when really they're not training to failure. They're training to 0 reps in reserve. And that's an important distinction. And I'll explain why. And then the second piece of the quote, I won't dwell on it, but is basically saying that the scientific community doesn't actually know why if you're doing that leg press, why you can't complete that 11th rep. What is stopping you? Is it your muscles fatiguing? Is it something in your central system fatiguing at a neural level? And so it's not clear. You can't definitively say it's muscular failure because the muscles might not actually be what's failing. If you set yourself up to a certain type of electrical stimulation machine, which they use in some studies to force your muscles to contract, they may still be able to contract and do that 11th repetition. But there may be something else stopping you. So that's why it's not muscular failure, it's momentary failure. Now, should you train to failure? It's an interesting and nuanced question. I think for the most part, the answer for bodybuilding is no. I think it's dangerous to try to get that 11th rep, especially if you don't have assistance, and literally fail that rep. There are some exercises where it's a lot safer, such as machines, especially single joint movements, like if you're doing a tricep press down or a bicep curl. If you actually fail the rep and get stuck, that's not that big a deal. But if you're doing something like a leg press loaded with a lot of heavy plates or a squat or a deadlift, that can be really dangerous. And the closer you get to failure, and especially when you reach failure where you're actually failing a rep, you're much more likely to injure yourself, partly because you're more likely to recruit other muscles. Your body wants to make the exercise easier. So Let's say you're doing a squat and you get stuck. Your body's natural instinct is to recruit as much muscle as possible to complete that task. So it'll start to recruit your back muscles to try to force yourself up, and different parts of your body, which if you're just recruiting those all of a sudden under load, you may be very likely to injure yourself because you're basically applying a lot of force to that area very suddenly with a lot of load on it. Um, Also, going to failure versus zero repetitions in reserve, um, that last repetition or half repetition, I should say, is really just adding a lot of fatigue and not necessarily a lot of extra stimulus. Um, Studies have shown that actually failing a set really decreases the number of reps you can get on a subsequent set, and for the most part, nobody's doing a one set workout for a given body part. You're usually doing multiple sets. So you want to be able to perform on subsequent sets and get the total mechanical tension and training volume to be higher. Also, once you get the closer and closer you get to failure, um, you eventually reach a threshold with motor unit activation where it starts to decline. So it rises as you get closer to failure, and then it eventually levels off and then starts to decline. And especially once you're past zero reps in reserve and you're doing partial repetition to actually hit failure, um, your motor unit recruitment is declining. So you're not getting as much benefit, and there's a pretty high cost and also risk to it. So hope this was helpful. Hopefully this clarified what failure really means. There's a lot of talk about training to failure. I just thought I would clarify here that most people aren't training to failure. Most people are either training to zero repetitions in reserve or something short of that. So I hope that clears things up. If you have any further questions, please leave them in the comments. Share this with someone you know who thinks they trained to failure, and have a great day. The show is brought to you by Element Electrolytes. And for a limited time, the Element Chocolate Medley is available with 3 flavors: chocolate mint, chocolate chai, and chocolate raspberry. They all go really well in any hot beverage, whether it's coffee, tea, or just a glass of hot water. And I personally love Element Electrolytes, and my wife does too. We've been using them for years. They're a great way to help boost performance, to help you get in the proper amount of electrolytes for a day, and help regulate brain health, physical health. Uh, Salt is important for a lot of things, and just drinking plain water doesn't get you the electrolytes you need. So check out Element in the description, or you can go to drinkelement.com/Scott Mize, and there you'll be able to get a free sample pack when you use my link and help support the show. Thank you. This is a quick disclaimer before we start the show. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said here should be taken as medical advice, and please consult with your physician before making any changes to your diet, exercise regime, or medications. Thank you, and on to the show.